When David Cameron announced a new nuclear power station at Hinkley Point C in Somerset in 2013, it was meant to be completed by 2017. Now its owner EDF says it won't be ready by 2023. What's going on? Why the delay? What will the cost be? We're joined by Lord Hutton, John Hutton, former Labour Defence Secretary, among other things, who chairs the Nuclear Industry Association, and also by Tom Burke, who's a strong advocate of sustainable energy programmes, a long-time advisor to governments and businesses on environmental matters. Lord Hutton, what has gone wrong here, do you think?
I think the EPR reactor, which EDF are building in France, has suffered from a number of engineering and regulatory challenges. There's no doubt about that, and it is taking longer to build than we hoped or expected. I think the upside for us in the UK, however, is that the design of the EPR has been through a very rigorous assessment here. It's been fully licensed, and I think we can have confidence that it will be built on time. And that, I think, is going to be very important for us if we want to make this transition from being a carbon-intensive energy-producing nation to a low-carbon producing nation.
Well, remind us what David Cameron described as being on time in 2013 and what you mean by on time now.
Well, there has been a delay at Hinkley Point, that's true. I don't think that those delays, Jim, are anything to do with the design, and they're nothing to do with...
They've got to do with money.
It's essentially, yes. It's been about
They're waiting
the
for the
process.
Chinese to arrive, aren't they?
Well, remember in the UK, the nuclear programme is going to be built without any state funding at all.
Yes.
So the risk about delay and the costs associated with that will be borne by the developers, not by taxpayers or consumers. And I think when it comes to energy, I think we should be clear about this. We do have choices. I mean, of course, there'll be some in the anti-nuclear movement who'll say we shouldn't build any new nuclear. Well, then I think we've got to, if we do go down that path, we've got to answer the question, well, where are we going to get our low-carbon baseload energy from? And I don't see any alternative out there that allows us to go forward and meet our low-carbon targets that doesn't involve nuclear energy in the mix. So the challenge for us is how do we do it in the most cost-effective way?
Well, at that point, we'll bring in Tom Burke, who I think you've just described.
Yes, indeed. I'm impressed by EDF's ability to have a nuclear power station that's 6 years late before they've even started constructing it. The head of EDF promised us in one of the many announcements about this actually going ahead that we'd be cooking our Christmas turkeys on it from electricity from it by 2017. Well, they're unlikely to actually start construction before 2018, supposing they actually make a decision to go ahead.
Take up John Hutton's point about what can replace the bit of our supply which would come from nuclear if it's not there.
Oh, there's a huge variety of things to replace the supply from nuclear. We've got a lot of wind, a lot of solar. We can do a lot more energy
What percentage of our energy needs can be met by wind and solar in 2023?
We're already meeting more of our current electricity from renewables than we are from nuclear. So we can easily
What's the percentage of wind and solar at the moment, and how high could it go?
Oh, it could go up to 45%, add in efficiency, and you get effectively a bigger percentage. Right now it's providing, depends on exactly when you
John
measure
Hutton,
it.
do you accept 45% from wind and solar? Leave aside other renewables.
Well, of course you could flex the amount of energy coming from any particular source, but I think you've then got to answer the question, well, what's it going to cost us to do that? And there is absolutely no doubt at all, for example, if you look at offshore wind, it is considerably more expensive as a source of energy than nuclear.
And that's true, Tom Burke, isn't
No,
it?
it's not true. Offshore electricity costs are now coming down to about where nuclear is. But the really important difference is nuclear costs...
But not lower. You're not claiming it's lower.
Well, let me finish the point. They're coming down now, and they're going to go on going down. Nuclear costs typically go up 7% a year real, everywhere, all the time. And that's because of constraints in the supply chain, because of the difficulty of the engineering and so on.
And that is the history, John Hutton, isn't it?
Well, it's not as simple as that, and I take issue with Tom about that, because there has been a very significant report from the International Energy Association only recently, which debunks the myth of the anti-nuclear lobby, that costs of nuclear inexorably rise. The costs of nuclear are not inexorably rising. They're actually being contained and controlled very well, and that's confirmed in this recent very signal and important report. But again, I think there's a certain amount of sort of ideology and almost religious zeal in this debate, and I want to concentrate more, if you like, Jim, on the practical economics and the cost competitiveness of these various energy choices we make. And I think nuclear does stand, I think, head and shoulders above other forms of low-carbon baseload energy for the UK. And if we don't go down that road, we are going to inflict upon UK consumers higher costs and greater uncertainty. And I don't think we should do either of those things.
Tom Burke.
Yeah, even David Howell, who was the minister who introduced the big nuclear programme in Margaret Thatcher's government, has started to express doubts about whether going ahead with Hinkley makes any kind of economic sense. It's rather odd to think that somebody knows what the wholesale price of electricity is going to be in 2065 when we don't really know what it's going to be next year.
John Hutton, I want to just ask you about one other thing. You're a former Defence Secretary in a Labour government.
Sure.
Jeremy Corbyn, who seems to be in the lead, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen next week in the Labour leadership election, addressed this question last night in a Sky hustings. And he said he would make huge cuts in the UK armed forces if he ever became Prime Minister. And he said he couldn't think of a situation in which he would deploy British troops. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's completely irresponsible. I think that's the wrong policy. I think you've got to look at foreign policy, not from the standpoint of a fixed ideology in that sense. You know, you've got to be able to respond to security threats facing the UK.
Well,
and if you're not prepared to deploy armed forces to defend the UK and the space of our friends and allies around the world, well, I don't think you should be the leader of a principal political party in the UK.
I mean, what he's saying is perfectly clear. He says we, Britain, are in the top 5 of military spending across the whole world. I think we have to look at those issues and the issues of nuclear weapons as well, and also what our foreign policy objectives actually are. He talked about whether Britain could afford a global reach.
Well, this is the old far left reasserting itself, and I think those views are completely at odds with the modern world and where Britain needs to be. We should be a force for good in the world, and we shouldn't be afraid to defend our values around the world when they're under threat and under attack. And I'm very disappointed to hear a candidate for the leadership of my party expressing views that are completely, I think, at odds with the reality of today's world.
John Hutton, Lord Hutton, former Defence Secretary, thanks very much. Tom Burke too.
3 minutes to 8. Philip Avery's back with the weather.